The pervert wanted to humiliate the new female student. Big mistake. Just a few minutes later, he had to kneel down and beg. "Do you think you can resist me?" Ryan Cooper growled, his eyes flashing with challenge. He grabbed her wrist and squeezed hard. "Do you think your silence will work at Riverside High?" Sophie Carter slowly raised her head. Her eyes were so cold that the crowded hallway suddenly fell silent. No one dared to breathe loudly. Those were definitely not the eyes of a scared person. "I'm not kidding, Ryan." Sophie's voice was calm, almost indifferent. "If you continue to push, you will regret it." The crowd burst into laughter, but none of them knew that, just as Sophie said, in just a few minutes someone would regret it. But that person was definitely not Sophie. It all started on a Monday morning when a thick fog still covered the small town of Riverside. An old car stopped in front of the high school. Out of the back seat stepped a 17-year-old girl with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. It was Sophie Carter. Her family had just moved from New York after her mother took a job as a nurse at the local hospital. For Sophie, this was her third transfer in just 2 years. She wore a simple jean jacket and old khakis, walking quickly and quietly. Every gesture exuded a single desire: to blend in with the crowd, not to be noticed. None of the Riverside High students knew that behind that simple appearance, Sophie carried a secret that, if revealed, would surely shock the whole school. Because Sophie was once an excellent young judo athlete in New York, a national representative. Her shoulder swings were strong enough to make a muscular adult lose the ability to defend. But that was in the past. "Promise me." Sophie's mother's words still echoed in her head. "In this new place, don't let anyone know how you trained. Just live a normal life, Sophie." She nodded. And that morning, as she walked through the gates of Riverside High, Sophie told herself, "I'll just be a normal student. No fights, no attention, just study and graduate." But then, as fate would have it, the first obstacle quickly appeared. Sophie Carter entered Riverside High with a clear determination to be quiet, to blend in, and not to reveal her true self. But sometimes, silence attracts those who like to take control. At lunchtime that day, Sophie chose a hidden corner of the table and opened the lunchbox her mother had prepared. She didn't know anyone, nor did she expect anyone to notice. But before she could eat much, a tall figure collapsed into the chair opposite her. It was Ryan Cooper, the captain of the basketball team, the man the whole school considered the king of the hallways. Following him were two close friends, Ethan, a small man with a mouth that always curled up like a prankster, and Mason, tall and rugged, walking like a moving wall. Ryan leaned his elbows on the table, smiling provocatively. "You're new from New York, right?" he said loudly, deliberately so that half the cafeteria could hear. Sophie looked up, her eyes calm. "Yes, I'm Sophie." "Yeah, Sophie Carter." Ryan said the name. "Let me tell you the rules of the game at Riverside. Newbies who want peace of mind know what they're doing." Ethan interrupted, his voice shrill. "That's right, $10 a week. Think of it as insurance. With us protecting you, you won't get into any trouble." Mason chuckled, his fists tapping on the table, as if to prove otherwise if Sophie refused. Sophie looked at each face. Ryan was confident as a predator, Ethan was eager for fun, and Mason was like a giant shadow ready to threaten. "I think," Sophie said slowly, "I can take care of myself." Ryan's smile froze for a moment. The cafeteria fell silent as if waiting for the next scene. Then he laughed, a deep, creepy laugh. "You just refused my rules? How brave, or how stupid." Sophie clenched her fists under the table. Part of her wanted to end this immediately with a single slap, but her mother's words and her own promise echoed in her head. No, not yet. She raised her head, her voice calm. "I'll think about it." Ryan leaned in closer, his breath hot, the taste of soda still lingering in his mouth. "Good. You have until tomorrow. And remember, don't tell the teachers. My dad sponsors the whole team here. No one wants to go against me." The group laughed, then left Sophie alone. Their mocking laughter echoed in her head. Sophie sat motionless. With just one slap, she could leave Ryan breathless for minutes. But she knew doing that in front of hundreds of students would make her a monster in their eyes. She took a deep breath, folding her lunchbox. A seed of anger had begun to burn inside her, and she knew sooner or later the time would come when she could no longer hold back. The next morning, Sophie walked into school with a heavy heart. She hadn't slept well all night, repeating Ryan's words over and over in her head, "You have until tomorrow." As soon as she stepped onto the first-floor stairs, a familiar laugh rang out. "There you are, our New York princess." Ryan leaned against the railing, Ethan and Mason standing on either side like two shadows. Sophie stopped. She knew she couldn't avoid him forever. "So?" Ryan approached, his eyes cold as ice. "Have you decided?" Sophie took a breath, straightened her back, and looked at him. "I won't pay." The whole hallway fell silent. Ethan raised his eyebrows. Mason clenched his fists. Ryan paused for a moment, then smiled wickedly. "Oh, I like this kind of recklessness." He suddenly raised his hand, intending to grab Sophie's collar, pulling her closer. In that moment, Sophie's instincts flared up. She leaned forward, preparing to counterattack. But at that moment, "Renee!" The bell rang loudly. The classroom doors opened and students began to pour out into the hallway. Ryan stopped, pulled back, and pretended that nothing had happened. He leaned close to Sophie's ear and whispered threateningly, "Enjoy a few more hours of peace. During recess, you'll know what it really feels like." He turned away, leaving Sophie standing in the middle of the curious crowd. She clenched her fists, trying to stay calm. She thought to herself, if it weren't for that bell, he would have been lying on the ground. That day in chemistry, Sophie was absorbed in copying her notes when a strong impact knocked her to the side. Her notebook and pens fell to the cold tile floor. When Sophie bent down to pick them up, a heavy sneaker stepped straight on the unfinished blank page. "Oh, sorry," Ethan said, the corner of his lips curling into a half smile. He walked away, leaving dirty shoe prints deep in the page. Sophie clenched the edge of her notebook, her fingers shaking with anger, but she took a deep breath and held back. "No, I promise not to cause trouble." At the second recess, Mason appeared like a moving wall. She had just stepped out into the hallway when her shoulder was hit hard, pressed against the hard wall. A sharp pain ran down her arm, making Sophie grit her teeth. "Watch where you walk, kid," Mason said coldly, not even bothering to look back. He walked away, leaving a bruise on Sophie's shoulder that was gradually becoming visible. Sophie stood still, her hand unconsciously placed on the sore spot. A cold glint flashed in her eyes, but once again she swallowed her anger. And then the climax came at noon. The cafeteria was packed with students. Sophie sat down at a table in the corner, and as soon as she placed her tray of food, Ryan and the rest of the group pulled up chairs around her, blocking all exits. "Did you hear that?" Ryan said loudly, deliberately getting the attention of the entire cafeteria. "There's a new girl who thinks she doesn't have to follow Riverside's rules." A chorus of giggles rang out. The air in the room gradually quieted. Curious eyes turned to Sophie. Ryan picked up her tray of soda and burgers, turning them around in his hands as if to amuse himself. Then, in the tense silence of everyone, he poured them straight down on her head. Cold water ran through her hair, seeping down her collar, sticky. Crumbs of bread, pieces of meat, lettuce fell to the floor. "Oh, I'm so embarrassed." Ryan pretended to frown, his voice full of sarcasm. "You don't mind cleaning up, do you?" Loud laughter erupted. A few phones were raised, lenses flashing, capturing every moment of humiliation. Sophie sat motionless. Cold water seeped through her shirt, dripping onto the tiled floor, leaving wet streaks. But her eyes were empty, not a single tear. There was only a deadly stillness, like a lake before a storm. She slowly stood up, her back straight, her green eyes locked on Ryan. "You just made a big mistake." Her voice was soft, but it silenced the crowd. Ryan paused. For a second, he saw something in Sophie's eyes, not fear, but something sharper. But then he laughed, dispelling the unfamiliar feeling. "Oh, what are you going to do? Tell the principal?" Sophie didn't say another word. She picked up her backpack and strode out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a resounding roar of mocking laughter. But inside, a simmering anger was simmering, like a time bomb waiting for the right moment to explode. Sophie walked quickly out of the cafeteria, the mocking laughter still echoing behind her. The hallway was deserted, her wet shoes leaving a trail of water on the tiles. She dashed into the girls' bathroom, slammed the door shut, and braced herself against the sink. The sight in the mirror made her heart ache. Her brown hair was matted, droplets of water and crumbs of food sliding down her cheeks. Her green eyes trembled not with fear, but with pent-up anger. She took a deep breath, trying to control herself, but her hands were still shaking. Her heart was pounding in her chest, urging her to sit still. This couldn't go on. It couldn't. Sophie pulled out her phone and dialed her old coach in New York. "Coach Daniels, it's me, Sophie Carter. Sophie, how's things at the new school?" "Not so good. I'm having trouble with bullies." There was a pause. Daniels had trained Sophie for 4 years, and he knew her better than anyone. He knew that Sophie would only call him if things got really bad. "Tell me," he said softly. Sophie told him everything. The threats, the intentional assaults, the humiliating lunch. When she finished, her throat was tight, but Daniel's voice was steady and steady. "Listen, girl, I know your mother told you to keep your abilities a secret, and that's true. But there are times when it's dangerous to hide." "What do you mean?" "If you keep putting up with it, they'll only get worse. Only strength can stop people like Brad. But remember, if you decide to do something, do it wisely. Not in school, not in front of witnesses, and never cause serious injury." "I remember what you said." "Good. And Sophie, no matter what, always remember, self-defense is your right." The call ended. Sophie looked in the mirror again. Her hair was disheveled, her shirt was soaked, but the reflection in her eyes was no longer trembling. There was only a quiet, cold determination. "Okay, Ryan Cooper. If you want to know who I really am, you will soon see." The last class of the day ended. Riverside School was empty. The students were leaving to go home. Sophie still sat in the library, pretending to read but actually waiting. With each page she turned, she repeated Mr. Daniels' words in her heart. "Go first, be precise, be decisive. No need to destroy, just show them they picked the wrong target." As the afternoon sunlight streamed down the hallway, Sophie stood up and walked outside. The parking lot behind the school was almost empty, except for a few cars of teachers and students who stayed behind for practice. At the end of the row, Ryan had just come out of the basketball gym, his shirt soaked with sweat, his sports bag hanging loosely on his shoulder. Sophie walked straight up, her voice clear. "Ryan." He turned around, raised his eyebrows, and then chuckled. "Oh, look who's here. Hamburger Girl. Are you going to apologize to me? Or pay the late fee?" Sophie stood a few steps away from him, her eyes determined. "I want a duel. Right here, right now." For a moment, Ryan thought he had misheard. Then he burst out laughing, the sound echoing across the empty parking lot. "Are you serious? You want to duel me? Fine, I'll finish this once and for all. I've been playing basketball since I was 10, coached by former NFL players. I lift 300 pounds. And you?" He looked at Sophie with contempt. "You look like a gust of wind could blow you away." "Then you have nothing to fear," Sophie replied, her voice calm but filled with strange power. She continued, "If you win, I'll pay you double what you're asking. I'll even do anything you want. But if I win, you have to leave me alone and apologize publicly in front of the whole school." Brad paused for a moment. He was a little hesitant at Sophie's confident appearance, but looking back at her small body, he looked arrogant. "Okay, the deal is accepted. No rules, no limits. Whoever lies down first loses." Sophie nodded. "Agreed." The two walked out to the empty asphalt yard in the middle of the parking lot. No spectators, no cheers. It was the perfect place for a match. Ryan took off his jacket, revealing his bulging muscles, broad shoulders, and full chest, completely confident in his physical strength. "Last chance to change your mind, Carter," he smirked. Sophie just gently took off her jean jacket, revealing a simple white t-shirt underneath. Her slim figure made Ryan even more disdainful. "Thanks, but I don't need it," Sophie replied. Ryan laughed coldly and roared before rushing forward, punching her straight in the face with all his strength. In that moment, everything slowed down. Sophie leaned to the left, letting the punch graze, blocking with her forearm. The movement was neat and decisive, like a reflex ingrained after thousands of hours of practice. "What?" Before Ryan could understand, his body was already off balance. Sophie turned her hips, her left hand hooked around his arm, her legs crossed, then poured all her strength into a perfect shoulder strike. "Bang!" rang out as Ryan's heavy body hit the asphalt. The air around him shattered, his breath caught. Sophie did not let go. She knelt, holding him in control, her eyes cold. "The first rule of a match," her voice was soft, sharp as a knife. "Never underestimate your opponent." Ryan tried to struggle, but all his efforts were in vain. His chest tightened. Dizziness spread throughout his head. In his eyes at this moment, the slender girl before him was no longer a weak prey, but a true predator. Ryan lay sprawled on the asphalt, his breathing ragged, his eyes wide open, unable to believe what had just happened. His whole body ached as if he had been hit by a truck, and his pride was shattered. Sophie kept her posture in control, but she didn't use all her strength. She had enough control not to seriously injure him, just to render him helpless. "You know, Ryan." Her voice was calm, but each word was like a knife cutting into his flesh. "I could totally break your arm right now. One twist of the joint would be enough." He swallowed, sweat pouring out, his eyes flashing with fear for the first time. You... "But I didn't do that," Sophie interrupted, her eyes cold as ice. "Because I'm not like you. I don't need to humiliate others to feel strong." She let go of Ryan, stood up, and took a few steps back. He staggered to his feet, clutching his still aching chest, breathing heavily as he looked at her with a mixture of anger and horror. "You have two choices now," Sophie said, her voice as clear as a verdict. "1. Keep your end of the bargain, leave me alone, and apologize publicly. 2. Continue this despicable act, and I'll show the whole school you lost in 30 seconds to a girl a head younger than you." Ryan's face changed. For the first time, he couldn't hide his trembling. He knew, if Sophie really wanted it, his reputation as the Riverside King would end immediately. "Okay," he said hoarsely, exhausted. "Okay, I'll do it." Sophie nodded slightly, slung her jeans over her shoulders, and turned to leave. Her steps were calm, but her heart was beating a determined drum. "I'm no longer a victim. This game is over." Behind her, Ryan sat motionless, his eyes vacant. In his head, only one sentence echoed. Who is this girl, exactly? The next morning, the Riverside High hallway was packed with students as usual. But today, the atmosphere was different. Because in the middle of the hallway, Ryan Cooper, who had once struck fear into so many students, was standing opposite Sophie Carter. His face was tense, his hands clenched, but his voice rang out clearly without any trace of sarcasm. "I'm sorry, Sophie. What I did yesterday, I was wrong. I'm such an idiot." Whispers arose everywhere. No one believed the scene before their eyes. Ryan Cooper, the basketball captain, the most arrogant person in Riverside, bowed his head to apologize to a new girl. Sophie looked straight at him, nodding calmly. "Thank you, Ryan. I accept your apology." In that moment, the invisible order at Riverside High changed. No one dared to laugh at Sophie anymore. Instead, curious, admiring eyes began to appear. Since the morning Ryan bowed his head to apologize in the hallway, everything at Riverside High had changed. No one dared to whisper behind Sophie's back, nor did they look at her with mocking eyes every time she entered the classroom. On the contrary, curious and admiring gazes followed her, as if they wanted to find out who this girl was. What surprised Sophie the most was Ryan. From an aggressive person who always tried to impose himself, he no longer harassed her. Sophie even caught a glimpse of him standing in the way when some upperclassmen tried to tease the new students. Ryan didn't say a word, just a cold look was enough to make them retreat. Sophie understood that he had not necessarily become a good person, but at least the confrontation the day before had made him know where his limits were. and from then on, the Riverside High hallways seemed to breathe a new atmosphere, more peaceful, less tense. However, peace in a school never lasts long. Rumors of Ryan's defeat to Sophie quickly spread beyond Riverside. Soon, students from Westwood High School, a neighboring school with a reputation for being unruly, heard the story and used it as an excuse to pick a fight. That afternoon, as Sophie left school with a few classmates, she noticed the silhouettes of 5 or 6 boys from Westwood blocking the exit to the parking lot. Bold faces, shiny leather jackets, familiar mocking smiles. The leader squinted at her, his voice insolent. "So this is the Sophie Carter we've heard about? The girl who made Ryan Cooper kneel in the hallway?" A crowd of Riverside students began to gather, half curious, half fearful. Ryan was there too. For the first time since admitting defeat, he stood up, took a step forward, his shoulders tensed. "Stay away from her." A mocking laugh erupted from the Westwood group. Another guy spat on the ground arrogantly. "Oh, it seems the former king of Riverside is now a bodyguard for a girl. How funny." Sophie was silent, her eyes cold. She felt Ryan turn to look at her, as if waiting for a decision. And in that moment, Sophie knew this was no longer just her confrontation. This was a new challenge, a battle that could change the position of the entire Riverside school. The Riverside students stood around the parking lot, not daring to breathe. The red afternoon sun cast a red glow over the asphalt, stretching out overlapping shadows, taut as a string about to snap. The leader of the Westwood group walked straight towards her, nearly 6 feet tall, with tattooed biceps and a provocative smirk. He stopped right in front of Sophie, his breath reeking of cigarettes and mints. "Listen, kid," he said, his voice emphasizing each word. "I want to see for myself what it is that embarrasses Ryan Cooper. Why don't you show us?" Around them, the Riverside students were whispering, some even taking out their phones, the screens flickering. Ryan stood next to Sophie, clenching his fists, but Sophie raised an arm to stop him. "Let me," she said, her voice strangely calm. The noise died down immediately. The air in the parking lot seemed to have been sucked out. The Westwood man burst into guffaws. "This girl is brave. Okay, I'll be gentle. I don't want to be accused of hitting a schoolgirl." He suddenly threw a rough punch at Sophie's shoulder, a move that seemed enough to knock a normal person down. But Sophie was waiting. She leaned slightly, twisted her hips, and grabbed his arm. In one breath, the giant's entire body was lifted, then dropped to the asphalt with a perfect shoulder strike. Bam! Down the sound echoed and shook the entire parking lot. The Westwood man doubled over, coughing, and before he could regain his composure, Sophie had locked his knuckles, her green eyes flashing coldly. "I don't want to fight," she said clearly, her voice echoing through the silent crowd. "But if you dare to touch anyone in Riverside, I won't stop so easily." She let go and stood up. The big man groaned, rolled to the side, holding his numb arm. His friends, who had been laughing arrogantly until now, suddenly fell silent, their eyes gradually flashing with fear. Ryan stepped forward, his voice hoarse but firm. "Do you hear? This is not your playground. Go back to Westwood." The entire parking lot fell silent. Then, under Sophie's piercing gaze, the Westwood group silently pulled the leader up, retreating in silence. A loud cheer erupted from the Riverside students. The sound of clapping and whistling echoed throughout the large yard. Everyone understood. From today, the balance of power had changed. Sophie stood in the middle of that circle, her hair still shining in the sunset, her appearance calm but proud. In the eyes of many students, she was no longer the new girl from New York. She was the one who had just stood up to protect this entire school. Ryan tilted his head slightly, his voice lowered, just enough for Sophie to hear, "Carter, I owe you one more time." Sophie didn't answer, just looked straight at the horizon. She knew in her heart this was just the beginning. When Sophie returned home, it was dark. The kitchen lights cast a warm yellow glow, and the smell of food lingered in the air. Her mother, Catherine Carter, was still sitting at the table, a cup of cold tea in front of her. As soon as she saw her daughter, she slammed the local newspaper down on the table. On the front page was a blurry photo of Sophie being shoulder-slammed in the parking lot, with the headline, "Riverside students take down Westwoods at school." "Sophie," Catherine said, her voice full of disappointment. "What did you promise me when we left New York?" Sophie tightened her grip on her backpack, taking a deep breath. "I remember. I promised I would live like a normal girl. But you see, they didn't give me a choice." "No, I can choose," she interrupted, her voice high-pitched. "You could have avoided them, told the teachers, even kept quiet. But you chose to throw them to the ground in front of the whole school. Now what? The whole town knows you're not like the other kids." "You're not like them," Sophie replied, her eyes sparkling but determined. "I've spent 4 years training to learn how to defend myself, and today, if I hadn't done it, someone would have really gotten hurt. I couldn't turn away from that." Catherine stood up, her eyes filled with worry and anger. "Do you understand what I want? I want you to be safe. I want you to have a normal childhood, friends, school, not to get into fights every day. Sophie, I'm tired of seeing you walk out of the house like a warrior instead of a daughter." Sophie's voice trembled, filled with both resentment and a desire to be acknowledged. "But it's me, Mom. I can't pretend forever. I tried. I kept quiet, endured, avoided. What was the result? Being humiliated in front of the whole school, being seen as easy prey for them. I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to just exist in the shell of normality that you imposed on me." Mother and daughter looked at each other silently. In Catherine's eyes was an unquenchable fear. Fear that one day her daughter would be seriously injured, or worse, lose her future because of an overreach. And in Sophie's eyes was a burning determination, a truth that she couldn't deny, that strength was part of her flesh and blood. Finally, Catherine sighed softly, her voice choked. "You'll never have a normal life, will you?" Sophie was silent for a moment, then answered softly but firmly, "No, Mom. I'll have a life that's true to who I am." In the small kitchen, in the darkness of Riverside Town, mother and daughter were silent. An invisible distance had appeared, but from here, Sophie's fate officially took a new turn where she could no longer hide herself. The next morning, Riverside High was like a broken beehive. News of the confrontation with the Westwoods had spread throughout the hallways overnight. Blurry clips were shared rapidly on student social media, the image of Sophie knocking down a guy 1.5 times her size, standing tall in the middle of a circle of cheering friends. When Sophie walked through the school gate, dozens of eyes immediately turned to her. No longer were they mocking or contemptuous looks like the first day, but curious, admiring, even hopeful. Jessica Martin, one of the most popular girls in the school, was the first to approach. Her face was tense, her hands tightly gripping her notebook. "Sophie, what happened yesterday? Is it true that you know martial arts?" Sophie hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I practice." As if relieved, Jessica spoke quickly, her voice full of worry. "So, can you teach us a few tricks? There are guys from Westwood who keep following us after school. The teachers can't do anything, and if we tell our parents, we'll just be banned from going out. We really need to learn how to protect ourselves." The other girls nodded, their eyes trembling but filled with anticipation. And then, it wasn't just the girls. A few boys quietly joined the group, their faces flushed, but their eyes determined. Sophie stood still, feeling as if the world had been put on her shoulders. Part of her wanted to refuse right away, so as not to disappoint her mother again. But when she looked at Jessica's worried face, at those trembling eyes searching for support, Sophie knew she couldn't turn away. "Okay," she said finally. Her voice wasn't loud, but it echoed throughout the group of students surrounding her. "This afternoon, after school, the old gym. But remember, this is not for fighting. I will only teach what is necessary for self-defense." The nods continued. The eyes seemed to light up. A wave of whispers spread quickly through the hallway. "Sophie will teach martial arts. Sophie will open a self-defense class." By afternoon, the old gym was packed with more than 20 students. Jessica, her friends, a few boys, and even faces that had only stood and watched from afar. All sat in a circle, attentively watching Sophie, the new girl from New York, now suddenly the leader. Sophie stood in the middle of the room, taking a deep breath. She remembered her mother's words from last night, remembered her worried eyes and the fear of losing her normal life. But then she also remembered Mr. Daniels's words. Self-defense is not only a right, but also a responsibility. The most important thing, Sophie began, her voice firm, is not strength. It's the confidence to face it. The best battles are the ones you don't have to fight. But if you have to fight, fight first decisively and end it quickly. The room was silent. In the eyes of the students, Sophie was no longer the new girl. She was the first one to dare to stand up and teach them how to stand up for themselves. That was the moment Sophie Carter officially stepped out of the shadow of an ordinary student that her mother wanted. She no longer lived just for herself, but became a small flame, ready to light up the whole group. News of the fight in the parking lot didn't stop at Riverside. Just a few days later, Westwood also got wind of it. And instead of staying silent, Travis Hale, the man Sophie had knocked down, the leader of the Westwood gang, decided to fight back in a different way. One morning, when Sophie arrived at school, she noticed a completely different atmosphere. Papers were pasted all over the hallways, printed with photos from that day's clip. Sophie locking Travis's knuckles. Under the photo was a scrawled line, "This is school violence, this is Sophie Carter." Sophie froze, her heart aching. The curious, half-believing eyes of the students around her turned to her. Immediately after, during the morning emergency meeting, the principal called Sophie to his office. Inside, besides Mr. Anderson, there were 2 local police officers and a man in a suit, his face cold. Sophie recognized him immediately. Travis's father, Carter, the principal began, his voice stern, is accused of assaulting a Westwood student. Aggression? Sophie tried to keep her composure. "Sir, I was defending myself that day. Travis and his friends blocked our path, threatened us, and tried to strike first." Travis's father immediately interrupted, banging the table. "My son was just playing around. He had no intention of harming anyone. This girl," he pointed at Sophie, "took down a student who was older than her in front of dozens of people. That's nothing less than public violence." The 2 policemen exchanged glances, taking notes. The heavy atmosphere weighed on Sophie's shoulders. Her mother's words from last night echoed in her head. "You'll never have a normal life, will you?" Sophie clenched her fists, but did not bow her head. She knew that if she remained silent now, all her efforts would collapse. "Mr. Anderson," Sophie looked straight at the principal. "There were at least 20 witnesses that day. They all saw clearly who blocked the road, who attacked first. I was only defending myself and my friends. If necessary, I am ready to confront each of them." The man in the suit curled his lips full of sarcasm. "Witnesses? They are all classmates. Who can guarantee that they are not all covering for you? The truth is simple. A new girl has turned Riverside into a place of open violence. If we don't deal with it seriously, how many other students will have to suffer?" Sophie looked straight at him, her eyes cold as steel. Anger welled up inside her, but she remembered Mr. Daniels' words. "No need to destroy. Just show them that they chose the wrong target." She knew that this battle was not just a knockdown in the parking lot. This was another battle, on honor, on truth, and if she lost, everything would collapse. That same afternoon, the news of Sophie being summoned to the principal's office spread throughout Riverside. By the end of the day, the official decision was made. Sophie Carter was suspended for a week, pending an investigation into school violence. As Sophie walked out of the office, she could feel the eyes on her. Some were whispering, some were looking at her like a criminal. The accusation papers with her picture plastered all over the hallways had not been removed, as if to drown her in scandal. When she got home, her mother, Catherine, was already sitting in the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes were dark from lack of sleep. The suspension decision lay on the table. Sophie. Her voice trembled, mixed with disappointment. I begged you, pleaded with you to live like a normal girl. But what are you doing? The whole town is calling you a bully. Sophie put down her backpack and looked straight at her mother. I didn't cause trouble, Mom. I was just protecting myself and the others. If I hadn't done it that day, they would have hurt Jessica and her friends. You don't understand, Catherine said, her eyes red. People don't see the reason. They only see you, a little girl who knocked down 5 or 6 big guys. In their eyes, you're nothing more than a monster. Those words were like a knife stabbing straight into Sophie's heart. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice calm. I'd rather be seen as a monster than stand by and watch my friends get hurt. If that makes you disappointed, Mom, I'm sorry, but I'll never regret it. The atmosphere in the house was heavy. Mother and daughter were silent, an invisible wall growing thicker between them. Meanwhile, at Riverside School, an undercurrent began to rise. Jessica and her group of friends took the initiative to stand in the middle of the schoolyard, loudly defending. We were there when the incident happened. Sophie didn't cause any trouble. Travis and the Westwood gang blocked her way, threatened her, and attacked her first. This affirmation was followed by many voices of support. Each witness gradually spoke up. Some even wrote letters of confirmation and sent them directly to the principal. The most surprising thing was Ryan Cooper. The basketball captain, who used to be the most arrogant person in Riverside, now stood up in front of the crowd, his voice echoing throughout the hallway. If you call Sophie violent, then call me a witness. I saw Travis block her way. I saw him attack her first. Sophie was just doing what any of us should do, protecting ourselves and our friends. Ryan's appearance stunned the whole school. The students who had been quiet now began to talk. And gradually, the voices of support for Sophie grew louder and louder. While Sophie sat quietly in her room, wondering what the road ahead would be like, out there, a movement was forming. People who had witnessed her, who had been helped by her, were now standing up and speaking up for her. A week later, Riverside High was in an uproar. The gossip had spread far beyond the hallways and into the town. Westwood was screaming that Sophie was a bully, while Riverside students who had witnessed it came out in force to defend her. Under pressure from public opinion, Principal Anderson was forced to hold a public meeting in the school's main auditorium. The seats were packed. Students, teachers, parents, and even local reporters. And especially Travis' father, Richard Hale, appeared with his personal lawyer, his face cold, his arrogant eyes scanning the auditorium. When Sophie stepped onto the stage, whispers resounded everywhere. Some eyes were suspicious, some full of hatred, but many eyes sparkled with trust. In the front row, Jessica and her friends sat up straight, while Ryan folded his arms, his eyes never leaving her. Principal Anderson spoke in a solemn voice. We are here today to clarify what happened between Sophie Carter and the Westwood students. Everyone has the right to speak, but remember, we are here to find the truth. Mr. Richard Hale immediately stood up, his voice booming like a hammer. My son was just playing around. He had no intention of hurting anyone, and yet this girl attacked him in front of a crowd, injuring his hand. This was not self-defense, this was outright violence. The noise exploded. Some parents nodded. Others objected. Sophie took a deep breath, stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was clear, unwavering. I do not deny that I threw Travis Hale to the ground, but it was not a play. It was an attack. He and his group of friends blocked my path and my friend's path, tried to hold hands, even blocked the exit. I have at least 20 witnesses here. Jessica stood up, her voice trembling but determined. I am a witness. Travis tried to touch me that day and his friend blocked my way. If Sophie hadn't been there, we would have been in trouble. That's right, another student added. I also saw Sophie only react when he made the first move. The testimony continued to ring out. The row of students was bustling, the voices of agreement growing louder and louder. Mr. Richard Hale narrowed his eyes, his smile contemptuous. Children always defend each other, but the truth is that my son is now injured, and this girl is being hailed as a hero. Is this justice? Suddenly, Ryan stood up. The whole hall fell silent. The basketball captain, who used to be a bully in school, was now the one speaking up. I was there. I saw Travis go in first, and Sophie was defending herself. If she really wanted to, she could have put him in the hospital for a month, but she held back. She's strong, but not cruel. And I'm telling you straight, Riverside needs someone like her, not someone who pretends to be innocent. The hall erupted. Students stood up, chanting Sophie's name. Many teachers nodded as well. The pent-up pressure exploded into public support. Principal Anderson banged his gavel, his voice low. That's enough. From what we've heard today, I can confirm Sophie Carter did not commit school violence. On the contrary, she acted within the bounds of legitimate self-defense. All charges will be dropped. The applause continued. Sophie stood there, her eyes brimming with tears. In the front row, Catherine looked at her daughter, her heart a mixture of worry and pride. Meanwhile, Travis's father blushed, but there was nothing he could do about the obvious truth. He walked away, leaving the entire auditorium exploding with relief. And in that moment, Sophie understood. This was more than just proving her innocence. This was the beginning. The day she would truly step into the light, no longer hiding who she really was. After the dialogue, when everyone had left the hall, Sophie walked out feeling both relieved and exhausted. The applause and chanting of her name still echoed in her head, but her heart was pounding like she had just escaped a storm. Mrs. Catherine was waiting on the steps in front of the school gate. Her face was tired, her eyes were red, but there was no longer the anger like the previous days. When Sophie approached, she stood up, walked over, and suddenly grabbed her daughter's hand. "Sophie." Her voice trembled slightly. "I'm sorry." Sophie was stunned, her eyes wide open. Her mother had always been a tough person, never easily admitting her mistakes. "I was wrong to make you hide yourself. I just wanted to protect you, to let you live in peace. But today, I realized you weren't born to hide. You're much stronger than I thought, and you made me proud." Tears suddenly streamed down Sophie's cheeks. She squeezed her mother's hand, feeling the familiar warmth. "I never blamed you, Mom. I know you were just worried about me, but I can't pretend anymore. This is me, and I need to live up to it." Catherine hugged her daughter, her voice choking. "Then promise me one thing. No matter how strong you are, never forget to be kind. Strength without compassion just makes you a different person." Sophie nodded, tears soaking into her mother's shoulder. "I promise. I will never use my strength to destroy. I will use it to protect, like today." They stood there for a long time in the now empty schoolyard. Without another word, they both understood that a new chapter had opened. Catherine no longer tried to hold her daughter back, and Sophie was finally recognized by her mother, not just as a little girl who needed to be protected, but as a real person, daring to step into the light. A week after the public dialogue, the atmosphere at Riverside High changed completely. The whispers about the school bully disappeared as if they had never existed. Instead, students whispered to each other about the girl who stood up and the one who made Westwood retreat. Principal Anderson, after several meetings with the faculty, officially announced to the entire school, "Starting today, we will be launching a self-defense extracurricular program for Riverside students. The leader is none other than Sophie Carter." The entire hall exploded. There was prolonged applause, loud cheers. Sophie sat in the front row, momentarily stunned. She had never thought things would go this far. That afternoon in the gym, more than 40 students were present. Not just girls, but boys as well, and even a few young teachers had joined the group. Sophie stood in the middle, her hands shaking slightly with emotion. But as her eyes scanned the waiting faces, a strange calm settled over her. "Here we go," she said, her voice clear. "First things first, self-defense doesn't mean fighting. It means protecting yourself and those around you. We'll learn how to stand firm, how to escape from a chokehold, how to counterattack enough to stay safe, and most importantly, always remember, true power is control." The group watched intently as Sophie demonstrated each move. As she demonstrated how to escape from a wrist grab, each student tried it, fumbling at first, then growing more confident. Laughter and cheers when someone succeeded filled the room. On the small stage in the gym, Principal Anderson stood with his arms crossed, nodding in satisfaction. Beside him, Catherine watched her daughter silently. Her eyes were no longer as heavy as before. Now there was only pride, mixed with a little bit of a mother's smoldering anxiety. After class, Jessica and a few other girls came up to her beaming. "Sophie, you have no idea. After just 1 hour, we feel completely different. No longer afraid of being threatened. Thank you." Sophie smiled, looking at each face lit up with new confidence. An indescribable feeling rose inside her, like she had finally found her true place. Not just a new student trying to fit in, not just a fighter who had hidden her title, but someone who gave strength to others. That afternoon, the gym had just ended. Sophie had packed up the mattresses, sweat still on her forehead after class. Most of the students had gone home, and only the sound of the wind from the soccer field was coming through the window. She didn't know that outside. A heavy shadow was quietly approaching. Richard Hale. Travis's father. His face was red with anger, his eyes blazing with hatred. His son's disciplinary action at Westwood was a shame that was hard to swallow. And there was only one thought in his mind: to make Sophie Carter pay. He walked into the gym, his hand tightly gripping the metal rod hidden in his jacket. Sophie, who was bending over to gather her things, heard footsteps behind her, but didn't have time to turn around. In that moment, the iron rod swung up, whistling down through the air. "Watch out!" a voice shouted. Ryan rushed from the hallway, not having time to think, using his whole body to block Sophie. A heavy sound echoed as the rod slammed into his shoulder. Ryan fell backwards, falling to the floor, his face pale with pain. "Ryan!" Sophie panicked, kneeling beside him. Ryan's shoulder was swollen and purple in just a few seconds. His breathing was rapid. Richard Hale paused for half a second, seemingly not expecting Ryan's appearance. But his eyes were still full of hatred. "My son was ruined because of you, brat. Now you have to—" Before he could finish, Sophie jumped up. Her eyes flashed with fierce fire. With the speed of a seasoned fighter, she blocked the next swing, turned around, and jerked the iron bar to the floor. A precise kick sent Richard back, staggering, almost falling. The door to the room opened, and several teachers and students ran over to hear the noise. The sight of Richard Hale with the iron bar in his hand, Ryan lying on the ground, and Sophie in a fighting stance made everyone freeze. Only a few minutes later, the police were called. Richard was handcuffed and taken away, screaming in despair. But Sophie didn't care anymore. She sat down, squeezing Ryan's hand, which was shaking with pain, tears welling up in her eyes. Why did you do that?" she whispered. Ryan forced a smile, his voice hoarse. "Because, Carter, this time it's my turn to protect you." Hot tears fell onto his hand. The ambulance quickly took Ryan to the hospital, leaving Sophie standing silently in the middle of the schoolyard, her heart heavy. The hospital room was white. Only the steady sound of the heart monitor could be heard. Ryan lay on the bed, his arm wrapped in a thick bandage, his face still pale from the minor surgery. Sophie sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes never leaving him since the ambulance had rushed in. When Ryan moved slightly, his eyelids opening, Sophie almost jumped up. "Ryan, are you awake?" Ryan tried to smile, though the corners of his lips trembled slightly. "Yeah, I'm awake and alive. You know, the feeling of being hit by an iron rod is really not fun at all." Sophie laughed through her tears, then quickly grabbed a tissue to wipe them away. "You idiot! Why did you rush in? That's my problem. You don't have to—" "No, Sophie," Ryan interrupted, his voice low. "I had to. All my life in Riverside, I was the one who dominated, the one who made others bow down. Then you came along. Not only did you make me realize I was wrong, but you showed me that true strength doesn't lie in who is better at dominating, but in standing up for others. Today it's my turn to do it, and I don't regret it." Sophie choked, bowing her head. "But ever since I showed my true self, everything has been a mess. Westwood, Travis's father, and now even you're hurt because of me. I'm starting to wonder if Mom was right, that I should have kept quiet, hidden away, left everyone alone." Ryan frowned slightly, his eyes shining with a rare seriousness. "Sophie, listen. If you hid your strength, maybe things would be a little more peaceful. But you would live in fear, and you would never forgive yourself for seeing others get hurt. And now, yes, you brought trouble. But at the same time, you also lit a light for all of us. I changed Jessica and many others too, all because you dared to step forward." Sophie lowered her head, tears falling onto the back of Ryan's hand. "But what if one day this courage costs someone?" Ryan chuckled, though his voice was still weak. "Then we will pay with you. That's what it means to not fight alone. Sophie, never doubt yourself again. You didn't drag us into trouble. You gave us a reason to be strong." Sophie fell silent. In that moment, all the worries and self-blame that had been pent up over the past few days seemed to disappear. She squeezed Ryan's hand and whispered, "Thank you. I promise I won't stop. I will keep going, not just for myself, but for everyone." In the days after the hospital incident, the atmosphere at Riverside High gradually became calmer. Travis's father was arrested for assault, and Travis was officially transferred to a reform school. For the first time in months, Sophie felt safe in the school hallways. No more challenging looks, no more snickers behind her back. Ryan remained in the hospital for a while to recover, and every day after school, Sophie and Jessica would stop by to visit. In that simple white room, they talked, laughed, and gradually forgot the darkness of the previous days. Friendship, even more than friendship, began to grow from the wounds. At school, the self-defense class grew, but unlike before, no one considered it rebellion or violence anymore. Mr. Anderson had officially made it a part of the extracurricular program. Sophie was called the instructor, but in the eyes of many students, she was a leader, not a leader with fists, but with courage and kindness. One weekend afternoon, as the sky turned red with sunset, Sophie stood outside the basketball court. The bouncing of the ball echoed, the wind blowing through her neat brown hair. Ryan, his arm less painful, approached with his familiar smile. "You know," he said, his voice softer than usual, "everything turned out okay in the end, and I believe it was because of you." Sophie smiled, but her eyes were distant. "It's not just me. Without you, Jessica, and everyone standing by my side, I wouldn't have made it this far. Maybe. True strength isn't about how many people you can beat, but how many people you can stand with." The two of them were silent for a moment, only the sound of the ball bouncing around the court. The sunset fell, bathing them in a warm light. A sense of certainty rose within Sophie. The stormy journey was over, and from now on she would live as her true self, not to frighten, but to inspire. The peaceful life her mother wanted and the strong path she had chosen had finally found their way, and for Sophie Carter, that was the greatest victory of all. Few months later, Riverside High was completely different. The bullying gradually disappeared, replaced by a rare atmosphere of unity. Sophie's self-defense sessions became a familiar meeting place, not only for the weak students, but also for the boys who once thought strength was just muscle. On the day of the school year's summary ceremony, the hall was packed. Principal Anderson stepped up to the podium, holding a plaque in his hand. He cleared his throat, then spoke slowly. "There are students who not only study well, not only participate in activities, but also change the spirit of a school. Riverside today is different from Riverside a year ago, and for that, we have to thank one person." He turned to Sophie. The whole hall stood up and applauded. The cheers were thunderous. Sophie blushed, her heart trembled, but she still stepped up to the podium to receive the plaque of honor. It read simply, "Sophie Carter, Class of 202, she taught us that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in being willing to protect." Sophie's eyes welled with tears. She remembered everything she had been through, from the soda-douse lunch in the cafeteria, to the jeers, to the confrontation in the parking lot, to the long night in the hospital with Ryan. All of it had led her to this moment. As Sophie's eyes scanned the crowd, she saw Jessica and her friends waving, Ryan smiling brightly, and her mother, who stood silently in the corner of the auditorium, her eyes filled with pride and a hint of tears. Sophie held the plaque high. Her voice was not loud, but it echoed everywhere. Thank you, everyone. I used to think that hiding my true self would make life easier, but I was wrong. Only when I dared to live true to myself did I find true meaning. And if there is anything I want to leave you, it is, do not be afraid. Any one of us can become a hero. We just need to have the courage to take the first step. The whole hall exploded in prolonged applause. From that day on, at Riverside High, on the wall of the hallway leading to the gym, people hung a picture of Sophie Carter, small in stature but with determined eyes, with the words engraved below, "True strength is protecting the weak. Sophie Carter, class of 202. Every new generation of students who passed by that picture knew the story. About a girl who was once a newbie, who was bullied, but turned an entire school into a safer place. And they understand that sometimes one person standing up can change everything.